everybody. Thank you so much for your interest in my newest book, Natural First Aid Essentials for Every Family. And I really do mean every family or every person should be able to have access to the information that is in this book. While we were away living in Mexico for a period of time, I learned firsthand how absolutely essential the information that I share in this book is for everybody to have access to. While we were away for a chunk of time, we moved out there with my two children at the time, 4 and 5, and we were there for just under a year. And while we were there, we met a lot of different families that had picked up and moved out there for a period of time. They were there with young families. They were there on their own. They're in an unfamiliar place. It's often a language that they're not familiar with. And so everything's kind of new. And a lot of situations really get amplified when you're out of your comfort zone. And one of the things that came to the awareness of not just myself, but for many of the other families that we met, was just how important it was to have natural solutions on hand for the myriad of different first aid scenarios that present themselves inevitably. They always will at some point, and that people need to be prepared in advance for when that happens. So my wife and I have been doing this for a while, and I've actually created a really extensive first aid kit, so I'm well versed with what to do when just about any situation shows up when it comes to first aid. And so while we were there, we became kind of the hub for most of the families whenever anything went wrong with themselves or with their kids. So whether their child had a fever and they weren't sure what to do, or their child ended up with an earache or sinus infection or something along those lines, and they didn't know what else to do, or they weren't comfortable going to the doctor at the time, or whatever it might be. The other thing you would see a lot of times would be like a skin rash or a spider bite or a bee bite or something like that. These are really common scenarios, and a lot of people just didn't know what to do or didn't have access to the stuff that they might have had maybe if they were in North America or Europe. A lot of times when you're traveling to different countries, the stuff you're used to, you don't have access to as much. So it also is really important to make sure you have certain things that you know how to use for different scenarios on hand. While I was away, there was two key knowings that came to me that really caused me to want to write this book. Number one was that I feel like everybody needs to have specific fundamental information on how to take care of themselves and their families, particularly when you're a parent and you've got kids and your kid gets sick or something's going on. You really want to know what you can do right there on the spot. I mean, a lot of times when you're traveling, you don't always have access to medical professionals. They might be several hours away. That's very possible. So you should be prepared for what can you do there on hand. And you need to have specific information to know how to implement that. The vast majority of first aid scenarios are very manageable quite easily with natural solutions. They're not hard to manage. You need to understand what you need to be able to do, and then also know when do you actually need to refer out? When is it something that needs to be brought to a healthcare professional? So we go through all of that sort of information within the book. The second thing that came to me that was really important was that people need to be prepared. So not only prepared with information and how to implement it, but they actually need to have a kit. You really do need to have a specific first aid kit with natural solutions and know how to use them, and then gain the confidence to actually implement it effectively when it's required. Most regular first aid kits really will help you disinfect something or patch up a wound or maybe put a cold pack on an area. So those are good to have, but I mean, they're really minimal. They're not going to address the myriad of things that you're really going to come across, which I'll break down for you in just a moment here. So based on the past 25 years of my experience being in healthcare, and particularly in my past 20 years of practicing as a naturopathic doctor, I've really had a chance to put together this research and clinical experience I have from that perspective, as well as the practical experience I have just being a dad and having 3 kids to care for, and the myriad of different ages everywhere now from 4 up to 18. So lots of different situations that we come across, and I've really learned to adapt the first aid kit to be able to deal with it. Now, the first time I had to make a first aid kit, we took the kids out to Costa Rica. My wife and I were running a retreat out there, and we brought the kids, and they were both pretty little, and they both ended up with a bad cold and flu while they were on the plane. So we ended up having to deal with fevers and coughs and an earache. They both ended up with Montezuma's Revenge, so I had to deal with food poisoning or travel diarrhea. All of these things were mitigated quite easily using just natural solutions that we took with us. Now, after that trip, it made me fine-tune it even more, because you realize sometimes when you go through certain experiences, you don't even know what you need until you're there. What I'm trying to save everybody the time is that I've been through most of it, and I'm trying to put together what I have compiled to be what I believe to cover most of the problems that you will probably encounter, and links directly to the same supplements that we use in our first aid kit. So each chapter is going to be broken down. I've got 6 key chapters that I think cover the vast majority of things that you're going to run into. Now, it obviously isn't going to be everything, but it will cover a lot of the big ones that I think most people come across. Each chapter is going to be broken down into an overview where we talk about the conditions, the different things around that you need to know. Sometimes we'll look at it from a bit more of a conventional medical approach initially. Then we go into the next section, which is going to be looking at home remedies, diet, lifestyle, and different sort of old school remedies that you can use for a lot of different things, including the diet and lifestyle stuff that you often will support whatever is going on. The third section is going to go through specific supplements. Now, these are the key things that I would say you should have in your first aid kit, and then we teach you how to use them. So those are things you want to have with you on hand, because those are the things that sometimes and most times are not always accessible. And bottom line is, like, if you need them, you want to have them on hand. I remember being in Cuba, and my daughter at the time, who was about a year old, ended up with quite a bad fever in the middle of the night. It just came on. And luckily, we had everything there to work with that and work with it throughout the night the whole time. And she was totally fine, burned through it, and we support her through the process. The fourth section is then to look at, when do you actually need to refer out? When do we need to consult a health professional? What are the warning signs when you need to actually send out for someone that knows more than what you know? So I think that's important as well. But it is important to remember that most of the things that you're going to come across, you will likely be able to deal with naturally. But you want to know, when is it getting to that edge where you need to kind of be a bit more careful? And then the last section just looks at the references, so you can actually review some of the different references if you would like. Now, I've broken this down into 6 key chapters. So each chapter follows that format. The first chapter is going to be tummy troubles. So this is going to cover the biggest ones you're going to come across, usually diarrhea and constipation. So whether that's from food poisoning, Montezuma's Revenge, or travel constipation, how do you deal with it? How can you even try to offset it ahead of time and prevent it from taking place? What are the different natural remedies you can use? What are the key supplements you should have on hand in your first aid kit? Chapter 2, we're going to go through cold, flu, and immune support. Huge chapter that has come up a lot over the last while. Everybody wants to know, what can I do to start to support myself or my child when I get the first signs of getting a cold or a flu? We go through that in quite detail on what you can do and what you can do to kind of ongoingly support yourself if you need to. Chapter 3 is probably one of the ones that scares parents the most, and that's fever. We actually talk about fever. I want people to understand fever a little bit better. And I want you to know, what natural things can you do to help to manage the fever as best as you can. It's important to remember that fever actually is a part of strengthening the immune system. We need to have a fever, but we need to know where it's at, and also when do we need to pull it back a little bit, and how do we do that naturally where we don't have to resort to taking Tylenol or aspirin or something along those lines. Sometimes that might be required. If it is, then you have a choice to use it. But there's a lot of things that you can do prior, and supporting a fever in the best way possible will often allow your child to have a more robust immune system response as well. Not just your child, but you too. Chapter 4, we go through ear and sinus congestion. So a lot of those ones go together, right? But we break them up into different chapters because there's a lot of information around each section. Ear is more like things like swimmer's ear or middle ear infection, pretty common. Those are the things that you will come across at some point. Often, especially with younger kids, it's not uncommon that the ears start to get affected when they're going through a cold because of the angle of the eustachian tube. So it's easier to get congested. We're going to go through some different techniques that you can use to help drain the area. We're going to talk about different supplementation that you can incorporate to try to have more of an antimicrobial, antiseptic effect within the ear to sort of deal with things before they become a bigger problem. And sinus congestion is usually when you get that from either cold and flu. Sometimes it can be really bad where you literally cannot breathe at all. And some different strategies that we've used. I remember breaking my nose a long time back. And so I would have a bit more of a predisposition to sinus troubles if I got a cold or if I got bad allergies. So I'm well versed in how to work with that. So I go through a lot of different practical experience stuff that you can use on your own, different strategies that you can incorporate, try and open up the sinuses and thin the mucus out and really get it out. A couple techniques that we have found so beneficial for our kids as far as getting rid of that, because you need to clear this area out or else you're going to be increasing the chances of a bad middle ear infection or just keep recycling this microbes that are going to keep you getting sick and not get you through a cold very effectively. Chapter 5, we go through bumps, bruises, burns, and scrapes. So almost inevitable that at some point you're going to sprain something, or you're going to scrape your knee. And how do you work with that? How do you disinfect it? What are some of the different types of even bandages that you can use for that type of stuff? We talk a little bit about things like bumping your head and concussion and looking at some of that part of things as well. We look at some of the different remedies that people can use to speed up recovery time and assist you when you are healing from any kind of sprain, strain, bump, bruise, scrapes. The last chapter is chapter 6, bites, stings, and rashes. And so these we're going to talk about some of the different plants that you can get in contact with that cause bad skin rashes, whether it's itchy or burning, different remedies that we can use for those different things, whether they're homeopathic, whether they're topical, different things that you can use to start to speed up recovery and soothe the irritation that can happen. This is also going to happen when you see things like bee bites or wasp bites or spider bites. There's even specific poultices that you can use really well to get the itch down and to even sort of absorb up some of the venom from the area as fast as you can. Very inexpensive, very easy to make. Now, that's going to conclude the book. Now, I'm actually in the process of putting together an amazing online course where I am going to be walking through all of this stuff with people, and we are going to do it practically so that you know exactly how to do it. And you've gone through it with me so that when the time comes, you have the confidence on how to implement it. I'm going to field all of your questions and we will make sure that we cover everything that we can cover. I think it's going to end up probably being about 16 hours, sort of a 2-weekend course where we're going to do this online. So I will have more information on that in the course section once that is ready. So if that appeals to you, I highly recommend to check that out, because sometimes you just need to have firsthand experience doing it and asking me questions so that I can field them for you and make sure that you've got the confidence on how to implement it. All right, everybody, I wish you all of the health and success in taking care of yourself and your families when it comes to any of these first aid scenarios, and I hope that this book serves you well. Thank you very much.